Hi, and welcome to a Tolbert music tutorial. Today we're going to be talking about the cello, everything that you need to know as a new beginner or the parent of a new beginner on this instrument. Now the first thing that you're going to notice is that I have moved myself down to the floor. This is really important. You would be surprised at how many students have the instinct that they're going to open this up in their lap sitting in a chair. It's a recipe for absolute disaster. We never, ever, ever want to open the cello absolutely anywhere but on the floor. We don't even open it up on a nice big table because when we have it up on a table, that's just a height that it can fall from down onto the floor. When it's here, it's much, much, much better protected from any kind of a small fall. If while we're trying to pick it up, it goes back down, it's not going to be the end of the world where it falling even from a table height could completely ruin the instrument. So always, only, ever on the floor. Something that's really important to note about cellos is that this is a soft case. This soft case is going to protect you against basic dings and scratches, but it is not going to protect you against major impacts, and it's not going to actually protect you from a lot of minor impacts either. It'll keep the instrument from permanent damage on minor impacts, but minor impacts will throw off some of the things about the instrument that I'm going to show you once we have it opened up. Almost all your cases are going to come this way, and they're all going to be some form of a zipper case in order to get opened up. Right now I have the instrument up on its side. The other appropriate way to store the instrument is on its back like this. Leaning it up against a wall like this is a very bad idea. It's just going to tip over and fall. It's just going to tip over and fall in one direction or the other. Even finding a good corner for it to go into and propping it up like this is a bad idea. It should be stored on its back or on its side. It should never ever be stored on its face like this. There's a component of the cello called the bridge that we're going to show you and talk about in just a minute once we've opened it up that it cannot rest on. Okay, that I had it on the face of the instrument doesn't mean that this one's ruined. I was very gentle with it in this particular case, but it should not be resting on the other face of the instrument, only ever on its side or on its back. And when we open it, it will be on its back like this. I'll face it towards you. We very straightforwardly unzip it. Sometimes the zipper is integrated into the case in a way where you will see that the zipper sort of meets up on either side. That one zipper will be over here on this side of the end pin, and the other one has to come up like this. But usually the case doesn't open all the way. It only opens part of the way like this. And that's sort of by design for protecting the instrument. We're going to get the end pin taken out of the end of the case like this. We're going to fold the case down a little bit, and we're going to gently pick up the instrument and pull it out from up here. I actually like to close the case and use that as a place to set the instrument down where it can't be scratched or anything like that. The next step is to take out your end pin. At the beginning, you may not know exactly how long to set the end pin. This is a student-sized cello, and I am a tall-sized person, so I'm going to extend this end pin all the way. I'm going to show you how to measure the proper setup for yourself and for your student once you have the cello in the proper playing position. And once you get an idea of exactly how far out the end pin should go to be in the correct position, it's going to go to the same spot every single time. Because it's going to go to the same spot every single time, I'm going to recommend using a Sharpie to mark on your end pin where it goes out to. You mark a little line right at the juncture where you stopped it after you've done your measurement, and that way you know where to bring your end pin to. At the beginning, students might need a little help with their end pin. It's the screw that tightens it into place or loosens it into place should only ever be hand tightened, but student hands are sometimes not quite strong enough to get it unlocked, and sometimes they struggle a little bit to get it tight enough so that it's going to stay in place. If that's the case, then we encourage them to keep trying it every time, and if I have to come by and tighten it really quick so that it won't move on them, then I'm very happy to do so in class, and you might need to do that for them at home until their hands get strong enough. That'll happen pretty quickly, fortunately. Okay, we've got the cello set up, and now the safest and easiest way to get it in the proper position is to tilt it up onto the end pin like this. Now that we have the cello up on its end pin, we can carry it by the neck like this. It's a good idea to stabilize it on the side when we're carrying it around the room and pulling and getting over to the spot where we're going to sit with our chair. In this case, I'll be bringing my chair to me. Now, I have a floor that is very conducive to getting my cello to stay in one spot. The laminate in my basement works really well with the rubber on this end pin. It's not going to be sliding around the floor like this while I play. I have to sort of be picking it up to make it move. It's really well anchored in place even when I put some pressure on it. But that is typically not the case. Instead, what's going to happen a lot of the time is you're going to need to have something to anchor that cello in place. This handy dandy device right here is called a rock stop. It has a rubberized, spongy bottom that is going to adhere really well to any surface that you place it on, especially once it gets a little bit of weight on it, that sponginess, and it just grabs the floor really, really well. And then this is where you would put the end pin of your cello. Like this. Now they also manufacture another type of stop called a strap stop. It has the same basic cup that you would put your end pin into, but instead of having that sticky bottom on it, it has a strap that connects all the way out to a big hook that can be placed under the leg of any chair. I do actually highly recommend the strap stops because they're a little bit more reliable than the rock stops. That rubberized bottom on the rock stop can get gunked up, dirt, grime, it wears down. They don't last as long, and I often find them on especially slippery surfaces not really working any better than the rubberized end pin on the cello in the first place. A strap stop is going to work with almost every chair because there's going to be some leg on the chair that you can place that strap underneath. Okay, now that we have the instrument in its rock stop secured below, we want to make sure that we have it set up at the right height for our body. The cello fundamentally meets this part against our chest in order to hold it in place, like this. And at that point, we want the headstock of the cello to be up next to our ear like this. That first position might even be a little bit higher for me on a full-size cello. I might be starting from about here as the exact proper position on a cello. It's like my left hand is lined up with my left ear like this. This is about the proper height that we want it at. Everybody's going to have slightly different comfort levels that come with this. You'll see Yo-Yo Ma has an extremely laid back posture. You'll see other cellists who sit a little bit more upright. There really isn't a right or wrong perfect answer here. We do want our students to be comfortable as well, while also working within a certain boundary of limits that are acceptable. I have seen a lot of students try to stand their cello up, basically upright in front of them like this. This is not right, and it won't work. You won't be able to perform properly. Your hands are too far out in front of you. Your bow arm is in an awkward position. It's not going to be able to work. And we're going to avoid leaning back too far and having too lazy of a posture like this. We don't want it down in front of us, and we don't want our bow arm way out in front either like this. There's a nice balance to be had in the middle. Okay, fundamentally, the cello is meeting my chest. I'm pinning it in place. I'll move back to show you. I'm pinning it in place with my legs. I'm not squeezing super hard. I'm just making it so that it's not going to be able to rock back and forth while I'm trying to use it. And then my left hand and left ear are a little lined up. This cello is a little small for me. For a full-size cello, it's going to meet more like this and be up just a little bit higher. That is going to be the orientation that you want to set your student up with. When it comes to rest position with the cello, you're already in it. Rest position and playing position are basically the same. Of course, you're allowed to sit back in your chair, and we care less about whether the cello is in the perfect position. So yeah, relax, move your body, let the blood flow a little bit and everything. That's the healthy thing to do in rest position. But you're not going to be laying your cello down for rest position, unless for some reason, you know, the rehearsal requires that you're not playing for the next 10 minutes or something. You should just be waiting patiently in a more comfortable rest position. Sometimes it's like this. Sometimes I need to lean forward and stretch out my back the other way. But as long as I'm still making sure that the cello isn't going to be going anywhere, then I'm in a healthy rest position. The next thing I'm going to talk to you about is the bow. The bow is a very, very sensitive device. They do all function close enough to the same that what you're going to see over the next minute is me talking about a bow, and I'll probably be referring to a violin because I cut the bow video with a violin in mind and with a violin bow. The cello bow is the same basic stuff. I'll be talking about the synthetic horsehair. I'll be talking about getting rosin onto the bow. I'll be talking about how you tighten and loosen the bow. All of that works exactly the same for this instrument, with one relatively, I won't say major difference, but with one minor difference, let's call it. The difference between this and the violin bow is that there is a different kind of rosin for cello bows. These strings are big, fat, meaty strings that are much harder to get vibrating. And in order to get them vibrating easier, we have a more viscous, thicker form of rosin that's going to get distributed on this bow to pull on these big strings over here. Okay, so it's normal to put a different type of rosin. Whatever came in your case is going to be fine. That we have found that that it is one corner that's been cut a little bit in terms of just putting in any old generic rosin into cello cases rather than making sure that it's genuine cello rosin. So it's not super expensive, and we do recommend that you end up picking actual cello rosin up for your bow. It's important for you to know that this portion of the bow right here is made of synthetic horsehair. And it's important to touch it as little as possible. We don't want to touch this portion of the bow. If you get your fingers on it a little bit, you haven't ruined it. Don't panic, but we want to touch that as little as possible. It tends to be one of the things that the kids like to experiment around with and touch actually rather a lot. And the more oils from our fingers that we get deposited onto that, the harder it is for it to retain rosin, the more it's going to get that same oil onto the strings of our instrument, which will then rust. And so it's really important that we're not touching this. You can actually, by touching it too much, ruin this portion of the bow and have to have it rehaired. All bows eventually will need to be rehaired anyways, but they can last a really, really long time if you take good care of them. So not touching this part of the bow. The next thing for you to know about with the bow is that this end screw right here is actually going to pull the horsehair tighter when you turn it in a clockwise motion. As I'm turning in a clockwise motion, it's actually pulling this frog back further, and it's tightening the horsehair of the bow. When I turn it in a counterclockwise motion, it's actually possible to turn it so loose that you can see that that synthetic hair is now really flopping around, That's probably too loose, and we don't ever really need it to be exactly this loose. The idea here is that when it goes into storage, it should be loosened. And I'm going to have it basically to the point right before it's all floppy like that. Here, it's pretty loose, but it's not flopping around like crazy. And that's about where I want it to be when it's being stored in the case. When we're getting it ready to be played, though, we're going to try to make it tighter than that. One great trick that I was taught by a fellow teacher is that if you can take on a loose bow and insert a pencil or a Sharpie like this, then as you tighten it up, what's going to happen is it's going to make that stiff and it's going to turn it a little bit. That's when you know it's tight enough. If it's tight enough to hold on to the Sharpie, it's probably tight enough to be played with. I'm going to be showing the students in class. Every bow is a little bit different, and I'm going to be going around and checking bows and showing them this is how tight your bow should be. And that's just part of the routine in the first couple weeks, and so they'll learn the correct tightness for their bow, because every bow is a little bit different. But it's something that we should practice at home and have the general idea of: clockwise to tighten, counterclockwise to loosen, and make sure that it always gets stored loose. If it's not stored loose and it just stays tight all the time, then you'll wear out this synthetic horsehair and you'll end up eventually ruining the bow. Really, really important that we make sure that we get in the habit of loosening the bow. If you go into the case once and it's tightened, don't panic. It's not necessarily ruined, but that's a really, really important habit to get into. All right, now that we have the bow tightened, we're going to start actually by adding some rosin to the bow. Rosin is going to come in your case, usually in this pouch at the top, and it usually is in some kind of a container with a cap like this. We can remove that cap, and this is nice fresh rosin. You can see that on this rosin, I used my car key, to scratch and score the rosin a little bit, so that as I'm trying to get rosin onto the bow, this is actually gonna make it a little bit easier for that to happen. So I do recommend taking your car key and just gently scoring the top of the rosin like this. The bows that they send are usually not even close to having enough rosin on them to begin playing the instrument. So if you can get this piece done for us at home, this is going to save us an enormous amount of time in school. All of our violin, violas, cellos, and basses are going to come in with fully naked bows, no rosin at all on them. And what you need to do in order to get this bow ready to play is to take the bow and draw it across that scored rosin. And you can see sometimes I'm focusing on one area that is really, really not having enough rosin, and I'm going back and forth, and sometimes I'm taking nice long strokes like this. At the beginning, when you first get your bow out of the case, it might take as much as 5 or 10, maybe even more minutes of rosining these bows in order to get enough rosin on them to really be ready to play. So if you can imagine us having to do that for every single student in class, it's wild. I'll sometimes be teaching class while getting a bow rosined up like this. Okay, everybody, it's time to begin the next song. Go! I'm still rosining the bow the entire class. I do try to get to school early and stay after a little bit late at the beginning of the school year here to help get these things ready. But if you can help us rosin these bows up like this at the beginning of the year, it is going to make a massive difference in getting everybody ready to go and be on the same page at the beginning of the school year. Now, this particular bow has actually been rosined for our instrument demonstration days, and it's probably more than ready now. It was needing maybe a bit more. Once you've done that first 10-ish minute run of getting rosin really, really on the bow, and it is very, very firmly and clearly grabbing the strings, really, really clearly grabbing them, when you're in that state, you're going to still rosin the bow every single time you play, but you're not going to need to do as much every single time you play. When you take your instrument out for the first time, you're going to tighten the bow, and you're going to go back and forth maybe 10 times. And 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and 6, and 7, 8, 9, 10. You've gone 10 times across the bow, and now you have enough rosin. And you shouldn't need to stop in the middle of the playing session to get up and go rosin your bow. You did that as a part of getting prepared, and now you can just sit down with the class and play. In rare cases, you're going to notice, oh no, I really do need some more rosin, and then you got to stand up and do that in class. But if we got enough on it at home, and we do it right before we begin playing in class, then we're ready to go. All right, welcome back to cello. Thanks for paying attention to that portion on the bow. It's really, really important. Let's talk a little bit about how we're going to build our bow grip on the cello. Now, we've already talked about the hair, and this portion of the bow right here is called the frog. And what I'm going to do with my thumb is I'm going to find that little crook in the frog right there, and that's where I'm going to put my thumb. It gets a little bit of an anchoring point right there. Here it is from the other side. My thumb is going in right about there. Now back to this side, these two fingers are going to come opposite of the thumb. And that's really fundamentally what's going to hold the bow, is between those fingers right there. Okay? It's nothing like a death grip. It's nice and gentle. It's nice and gentle. If somebody came by and tried to take it out of my hand, they would take it right out of my hand really very easily. It's just enough to hold on to it. You might actually find with the cello that it's easier to build the bow grip while it's resting on the strings like this, because you have something to help balance it. You're not going to drop it. There's something to help hold the weight of the bow right here. So I'll show you the rest from this position right here. I've got the thumb. I've got these other two fingers opposite. My forefinger is just going to lean over onto this rubber part right here. It's just going to lean over like this, and the pinky is going to go on top like that. The bow grip is where the beauty and control of the sound comes from. Just like Lionel Messi wants to dribble the ball even cleaner than he already does, the best cellists on earth want to have an even better bow grip than they already have, an even more elegant and delicate bow grip. And so this is a lifelong journey. It doesn't need to be perfect right now. And in fact, we're going to get a lot of students just kind of grabbing on and going. And to get them playing the right notes with us, I'm actually going to sacrifice correcting that all the time in class from time to time. But especially when they're home on their own, this is something that it would be really helpful if you can remind them of, oh yeah, stand your hand back up. Don't let it just collapse down into grabbing a bat. It is not a bat. Bam, bam, bam. Okay, we need a much more elegant grip on the bow like this. It takes time to develop this and be comfortable doing it this way, but the sooner we get there, of course, the better. Okay, we have our cello in the proper position. Remember, mine's a little low because this is a student model, so yours is probably going to be sitting up a little taller than this. And this particular bow grip that I have built, I'm now going to play the first note that we learn on the cello. I have great news for you, cellos. Your first note is easy as pie. You don't have to use your left hand. It's the big fat open string right that's closest to you, on the far right that's closest to you. That's the note right there. You're playing C. I recommend starting with the bow about here. If you come back too close to the frog, it might feel a little imbalanced and weird. We almost never use that last quarter of an inch on the bow anyways. We would almost never use that. But even starting all the way over here is just asking for a more difficult experience for the student at the beginning. We want to have them starting about here. And going till about there. If they go all the way out to the tip, again, it gets a little weird and imbalanced, so you want to stay in a lane that's generally around the center of the bow. And as you can see, I'm drawing the bow across the string in a perpendicular line. Actually, as I check my camera, it doesn't look perpendicular because it's at kind of an awkward angle. It's facing towards me. But if it wasn't perpendicular, you wouldn't be hearing the right sounds. The reason it looks a little off is because, of course, the string is tilted towards me right now. So there's a little bit of forbearance that you have to imagine in terms of the angle. It looks like maybe my angle against the string on this camera looks kind of acute. It's not. It's 90 degrees. It's perpendicular. If I were truly acute like this, hear how that sounds kind of funny? It's scratchier. Or if it was an obtuse angle, then that's not going to work either. And you can see how it really messed up my bow grip as well. Everything sort of fits together here. If we have that nice, elegant, open, beautiful bow grip, then we're going to get our best first sounds. Okay, so that's the first note that we would teach you. The second note that we teach you, fortunately, is another relatively easy one. It's first finger. We call this the first finger, second, third, and fourth on cello. We number the fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to go first finger on the first piece of tape. When you first take your cello out of your case, it's not going to be taped. They don't do that at the store. That's something that we do in schools. It is a very laborious, tedious process, and it can take a few weeks to get all of the instruments taped. If yours isn't taped right away, we're sorry. We're going to get to it as fast as we possibly can, but they just simply aren't all going to get taped in the first or probably even the second week. We come early, we stay late. If you make sure that your student comes with their instrument, we were going to be prowling around the school looking for instruments and just taping them all up as quick as we possibly can get them. Obviously, if it's been taped from last year, you won't need to get it retaped or anything. But if you're a brand new beginner, it won't come out of its case with these tapes on it. So don't be worried about that. And if that's the case and you haven't got the tapes yet, then just practice doing different open strings. Just practice playing the different open strings, and we'll add fingers once we get your tapes on. It takes time in class for us to get to the point that you need to use these anyways, so they will be on there by the time that you need them. The first 3 notes are over the first several weeks of class. So C, the first note, D, the second note. I want you to know that placing your finger on these tapes, there's a couple of different rules to understand. First of all, the tape is an approximation. You have to use your ears, and sometimes you will notice that's not the same thing as everybody else, and you might have to be slightly higher than the tape. This is actually higher because this makes the pitch go up. So in this direction is higher. You might be slightly higher than the tape, or you might be slightly lower than the tape. It depends on what's happening around you in the rest of the orchestra. These are approximations so that younger students know about where their finger is supposed to go, but they have to know that their ears are going to make minor corrections as well. All right, this isn't a bullseye. It's the target's in that general direction. Okay, when you put your finger down on the cello, you need to make sure that it's nice and tall and curved like this. It shouldn't be flattened out, and it shouldn't be hyperextending the first knuckle there like this. It should be all bent over the top like this, and it should be coming down in a relatively straight line. If it's coming down flat like this, that means you're touching these other strings over here, and you're not going to be able to play them with the bow. So you need to have your string nice and your finger up nice and tall, touching that low C string on the first piece of tape with your thumb in the back. With your thumb in the back, just on the opposite side, so that you're pinching it down like this. And that's going to produce your second note, D. You can hear mine went a little low for a sec there. I'm not primarily a stringer. I know where all the positions are supposed to be, but I'm more likely for my finger to land in the wrong spot. And I can use my good musician's ears to try to make adjustments when I land in the wrong spot. We're actually going to end up skipping the second finger for now. The second finger is going to get used for the notes E flat or D sharp, but we're not starting there. We're starting on E natural, and so we're going to skip up to our third finger. So the first note is open, the second note is 1, the third note is 3. Then we'll go up to 4, and then we'll end up going up to the next open string from there. We'll have cleared up what we're going to do on this string, and then we'll be moving up to this string. So C, D, E, F, and then this second string here is called G. And so really your first 3 notes are open, first finger, first tape, third finger, second tape. A little confusing, third finger, separate tape. It has to do with how whole steps are treated in music, and that's why we tape it up this way. Sorry that it probably feels a little illogical at first, but there are some parallels to, like the English language where some of the rules seem a little bit funny. It does make an awful lot more sense why we might tape it up this way once you know more about keys and how they work. So to be within the same conventions that the rest of the music world is using, that's why we're taping it this way, and that's why we're going to number our fingers 1, 2, 3, 4, and there's going to be first, second, and third tape. So C, open. D, first finger. E, third finger second tape. And now you're playing your first 3 notes on the cello. Okay, last but certainly not least, we have to talk about the long-term maintenance of the cello. I've got great news. There's really not a ton for you to do here. You need to, a couple things to keep in mind are mostly like little no-nos. At the beginning, don't touch the tuning pegs. These things are really actually rather sensitive, and when you twist them to tune the instrument, you're gonna knock it really, really, really far out of tune. If the instrument gets bumped into things, these are going to jump out of place. They're wedged in there nice and tight, but they need to be able to be twisted too. And so if you bump too hard, then they will loosen a little bit and they'll jump out of place. And then you'll come in with a detuned instrument, and it takes a while for me to have to retune it and then get back to teaching the rest of the class. So be very sensitive with these. Don't touch them, don't turn them, don't bump the instrument into anything, of course. And that's basically the maintenance that you have to do on that, is don't mess with it. I'll say the same thing about the bridge. The bridge of the instrument is also a very sensitive part of the instrument. If that gets bumped or anything, it actually can get knocked over. It's not screwed into place. It's not glued into place. It's being held down by the tension of the strings on this instrument. And if the strings get loose or if it gets knocked too hard, it can fall right over. That doesn't mean it's broken. I can actually set the bridge back up myself. I can help you with that, but obviously in an ideal world, we won't have to worry about any of that anyways. You'll just make sure that the bridge doesn't get knocked into. Same thing with these fine tuners for now. Don't worry about touching the fine tuners. I'm going to show you all much later how to tune the string instruments by yourself. During the first few weeks of class, when I'm first tightening these strings up, they're going to get tight, and then they're going to slacken and lose a little bit of their tuning, and then I'm going to do it again and again. And after a few times of doing it, it'll actually settle in a way where I probably don't need to tune it every single week, or the tiny little things that I have to do involve turning these down here, and I'm just making micro adjustments each week to make sure each student is in tune and able to play along with the rest of the class. I do double check at every class. I've gotten to where I'm tuning in the middle of class. I'm twisting knobs on a cello in the middle of teaching everybody else. It's just part of what we learn to do as music teachers. But the better care you can take care of it at home, the less I have to burn time on that and be multitasking while we're trying to teach the rest of the class how to play everything that they need to play. So I realize those aren't exactly maintenance tips, but they're important tips that will make our class run a lot more efficiently if you all know about them. Now, the one maintenance thing that you do actually need to know about is that you need to wipe down your instrument. You might be able to see that a lot of rosin has accumulated on the string here of this instrument. If I were playing for long enough, it will also have accumulated on the fingerboard, and it will have accumulated on this part of the instrument right here, right above the bridge. I'm going to take a rag and I'm going to wipe off that excess rosin, because if it sits there, that's not good for the instrument. I'm just very gently pushing the strings aside a little bit so that I can get underneath where they were to wipe up the excess rosin that was there. And then getting the excess off of this. And that's basically it. Eventually, strings are going to pop. When strings pop, you don't want to replace them yourself. Watching a YouTube video and doing it yourself is totally possible, but it's much, much, much better of an idea to take it over to the store and have them do it for you. The way that these strings are supposed to be wound around the pegs in the peg box is really pretty specific, and if you don't get that just right, then your string is going to last less and it's going to be harder to get it in tune. It's actually going to create a number of problems, so it's worth just going ahead and letting one of them do it for you. Strings are not exorbitantly expensive. They're not super cheap. You want to be very careful with them. You don't want to be breaking strings unnecessarily, of course, but please know that you are going to eventually, hopefully after like a couple years, It should be at least as long as that, but you will eventually need to replace some strings. If one pops on you early on and it wasn't clearly, be honest, but if it wasn't clearly your fault, if you were cranking away or your student was cranking away on one of these, then yeah, that's going to break a string, and that's not the store's fault. But if your cello was just kind of left alone, and sometimes I'll be adjusting a string and it'll pop, and I'll know, oh, that had to have been a kind of old string because it just came out of this bag and I didn't way over tighten it, since I know what the adjustments are supposed to be myself. But if you do have one that fails early on, they should go ahead and replace it for you without asking you to buy another one. But they will eventually need to be replaced. Okay, well, that concludes our cello tutorial. Thank you so much for hanging out for the whole thing. You should have how to take it out, how to set it up, how to make sure that you've got it in the correct position, where to put your fingers, and how to use the bow for the first 3 notes of the song, and then how to take care of the thing in the long term. If you have any extra questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you have any feedback about things that we missed in this video, let me know, and I'll try to get them edited in for a future version of it. Thanks again for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in class.